man at the art gallery told me I couldn't possibly understand the painting in front of us. I painted it. I was standing in front of my largest piece at the gallery opening, champagne in hand, when a man in an expensive suit approached and started explaining my own painting to me. He had no idea I was the artist because the placard said Riley Turner, who he clearly assumed was a man since he kept talking about his brilliant technique. This guy Robert looked me up and down and said, "You seem young to be at an opening like this. Let me guess, looking for a rich boyfriend? Smart girl, lots of wealthy men here." He gestured at my painting like he owned it. "See, what Riley is doing here requires years of training to appreciate. You probably just think the colors are pretty. The average woman just sees decoration." I took a sip of champagne and said, "Interesting perspective," which I guess he took as encouragement. Robert moved closer to the painting, physically stepping in front of me, and continued his lecture. "A girl like you probably thinks this is just nice to look at, but there's actual intelligence behind it. The artist is obviously a man because women simply don't have this kind of technical mastery. Female painters do flowers and feelings. This has real intellectual depth. It's biological, really. Men are just more capable of this level of abstraction." When I mentioned I was familiar with the artist's work, Robert laughed and patted my shoulder. "Following him on Instagram to look at the pretty pictures doesn't count as being familiar with art, sweetheart. You probably think you're cultured because you went to that Van Gogh light show. Real knowledge comes from decades of study, not whatever you learned from TikTok." Robert decided to test me, rapid-firing questions. "Who's Basquiat? What's chiaroscuro? Name 3 Renaissance painters besides Da Vinci." When I started to answer, he cut me off. "Wrong. See, this is why galleries shouldn't have open events. You probably Googled some terms before coming here to impress men. But Riley here is working in a tradition you couldn't possibly understand without a proper education. Not community college, sweetie. Real universities." He returned to my painting, now explaining it louder to draw a crowd. "What Riley has achieved here would cost probably $100,000 in education to even attempt. The materials alone cost more than you'd make in a month at whatever retail job you have." He looked at my outfit with disgust. "Target clearance rack, right? Someone who shops there couldn't possibly grasp the investment in this piece. He probably spent more on one brush than your entire outfit." When I suggested the artist might be self-taught, Robert sneered at me. "Is that how you learned about art? Painting parties?" Robert grabbed my wrist to pull me to another angle, his grip too tight. "You're too stupid to even stand in the right spot. Riley intended for this to be viewed from exactly here. Your ignorance is actually disrespectful to his work." He kept his hand on my wrist while explaining. "Though honestly, explaining this to you is like teaching calculus to a toddler. You lack the basic foundation to understand any of it." He noticed me trying to pull away and squeezed harder. "What? Am I keeping you from taking selfies? This is exactly why serious collectors hate these events. Girls like you come for the free alcohol and to hunt for sugar daddies. You're polluting the space where real art appreciation happens." He waved at a security guard. "She's drunk and harassing patrons. You should check if she even belongs here." Then Robert turned and spoke to the crowd that had gathered. "This is what's wrong with art today. Unqualified people like her think their opinions matter. Riley Turner is a genius who will be studied in universities. The difference between someone like him and someone like her is that he has actual talent and intelligence, while she's just taking up space that belongs to people who deserve to be here. She's literally stealing oxygen from real art lovers." People murmured uncomfortably, and I think someone was about to tell him who I was. But that's when the curator stepped up to the microphone with the world's most perfect timing and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to invite our artist, Riley Turner, to say a few words about the collection." I turned to Robert and held out my champagne glass. "Would you mind holding this for me?" His hand automatically reached for the glass as I walked toward the platform, and I watched his face change from confusion to recognition to absolute horror as I took the microphone. I definitely had a few words to say. My hands wrapped around the microphone stand, and I took this really deep breath that seemed to last forever. The whole room was dead quiet, and Robert stood there frozen with my champagne glass in his hand. His face had gone from smug to confused to completely white in about 3 seconds. I could feel everyone staring at me, but I kept my voice super calm and steady. "Thank you all so much for coming tonight to see my work." My eyes found Robert's face for just a second, and he looked like he might throw up. I turned back to the crowd and smiled at the people who'd been watching everything unfold. "This collection means a lot to me, and I'm grateful you're all here." The microphone picked up every word clearly, and I noticed people starting to shift and whisper to each other. My largest piece here, the one you see behind me, was actually inspired by moments exactly like what just happened. Several people turned to look at Robert and then back at me. The crowd was getting uncomfortable, and I could see them putting together what they'd just witnessed. "It's about the assumptions people make about who belongs in certain spaces." A woman near the front nodded and gave me this small, supportive smile. "Who gets to create art, and who just gets to look at it?" Robert was trying to back away, but the crowd had closed in around him. "Who has the right to take up space in galleries and museums?" My voice stayed level, but I could feel my wrist starting to throb where he'd grabbed me. This piece took me 6 months to complete. I gestured at the painting and noticed Robert trying to set down my glass on a nearby table. Every technique you see here I taught myself through YouTube videos and library books. A few people actually gasped, and I saw them looking between me and Robert. No fancy art school, no $100,000 education. Robert was literally trying to disappear into the floor at this point. Just a lot of late nights watching tutorials and practicing in my tiny apartment. The security guard who Robert had waved over earlier was watching everything with his arms crossed. I developed my own methods through trial and error, mixing traditional techniques with stuff I figured out myself. I used the exact word Robert had thrown at me earlier, chiaroscuro, explaining how I'd learned it from a Renaissance art documentary. The layering technique he mentioned, that some people mentioned, came from experimenting with different brush sizes. My wrist was really hurting now, but I kept going. The color theory work happened because I couldn't afford to waste paint, so I had to plan everything perfectly. Someone in the back started clapping, but stopped when they realized no one else was. Each section represents a different barrier I've faced in the art world. The curator was standing to my left, nodding and looking pleased with how I was handling this. From people assuming I couldn't understand my own work to being grabbed and physically moved because I was standing wrong. That got some sharp intakes of breath from the crowd. I wrapped up by thanking everyone again and saying I hoped they'd look at the piece with fresh eyes. The curator smoothly stepped up and took the microphone from me, her hand briefly squeezing my shoulder. Thank you, Riley, for that wonderful insight into your process. She addressed the whole room with this warm, professional tone. Please, everyone, take another look at the collection with this new perspective. The crowd started moving slowly, breaking into smaller groups, and I stepped down from the platform. People immediately started approaching me, some asking about my techniques, others just offering quiet support. One older woman whispered that she'd seen everything, and was appalled by Robert's behavior. A younger guy asked if I had a website where he sold prints. I answered questions and shook hands for about 10 minutes, trying to be professional even though my wrist was killing me. That's when I felt someone behind me and turned to find Robert standing way too close. We need to talk about this misunderstanding. His voice was low and urgent. I took a step back toward the bathroom and he followed me into the hallway. Look, I obviously didn't know who you were. He was sweating and kept looking around to see if anyone was watching. This is all just a big mix-up that we can clear up right now. I looked down at my wrist, which was already starting to turn purple. Grabbing someone hard enough to leave bruises isn't a misunderstanding. He reached toward me and I stepped back again. You assaulted me in front of witnesses. His face went red and he started to argue, but I just turned and walked away. I went into the bathroom and locked the door, finally able to look at my wrist properly. The marks from his fingers were dark and obvious against my skin. I ran cold water over it and tried not to cry from frustration and pain. When I came out, the security guard was waiting in the hallway. Miss Turner, I saw what happened earlier when that man grabbed you. He looked genuinely concerned. He complained to me that you were drunk and harassing people, but I saw him grab your wrist. He gestured at my arm. Do you want to file a report about this? I showed him my wrist and watched his expression change. That's definitely going to bruise bad. He pulled out a notebook. I can document this right now if you want. Before I could answer, Cadence appeared around the corner, her face tight with anger. Riley, holy shit, I got the whole thing on video. She held up her phone. I started recording when he was going on about women not understanding art. Her expression was both furious and supportive. Do you want me to send this to you? She showed me a bit of the video, and I could hear Robert's voice saying women lack the biological capacity for abstract thought. This is evidence if you need it. The security guard looked interested in the video too. I was trying to process everything when the curator found us in the hallway. Riley, can we talk privately for a moment? She led me to a small office behind the main gallery. I need to ask if you want to make a formal statement about what happened tonight. She sat down across from me looking genuinely worried. But I should tell you that Robert is one of our major donors. I could see her doing calculations in her head. The gallery wants to support you, but this could get complicated. She glanced at my wrist. That looks painful. Have you considered seeing a doctor? I realized this was way bigger than just some jerk insulting me at my own opening. I stood up from the chair and told the curator I needed a minute, then walked straight to the bathroom where the lights were bright enough to really see the damage. My wrist looked worse than I'd thought, dark purple marks already forming where each of Robert's fingers had pressed into my skin. I pulled out my phone and took photos from different angles, making sure the timestamp showed in each one, then held my wrist under the cold water trying to reduce the swelling. The bathroom door opened and another woman came in, saw my wrist and immediately asked if I was okay. I told her what happened and she said she'd witnessed the whole thing, gave me her business card in case I needed a witness statement later. Back in the office, the curator was on her phone looking stressed, and when she hung up, she told me Robert had already called the gallery owner claiming I was trying to ruin his reputation. The next morning, my phone rang while I was still in bed and Weston Mendez introduced himself as the gallery owner, his voice careful like he was walking on broken glass. He asked me to come in that afternoon to discuss the situation, mentioned that Robert was a significant patron who'd donated over $200,000 to the gallery over the years. I could hear him typing while we talked, probably already drafting some kind of damage control statement. After I hung up, my email pinged with a message from Adriana Whitehead, who I recognized as one of the serious collectors from last night. She wanted to discuss purchasing my second largest piece, but asked directly if this drama might affect the work's future value, which made my stomach drop because I hadn't even thought about how this could impact my actual sales. While I was typing a response to her, another email came in from Dorian Holcomb at the local arts magazine, saying 3 different people had contacted him about witnessing something significant at the opening and asking if I'd give him an exclusive interview. I closed my laptop and sat on my couch for 20 minutes, just staring at the wall, then opened Instagram and started typing a post about what happened without using Robert's name. I wrote about gatekeeping in art spaces, about men who think they own culture, about the bruises on my wrist from someone who thought I didn't belong in my own exhibition. Within 10 minutes of posting, my phone started buzzing nonstop with notifications, comments flooding in faster than I could read them. Some were supportive, women sharing their own stories, but others were calling me dramatic, saying I was trying to cancel an innocent man over a misunderstanding. My phone rang, and it was the gallery's publicist suggesting I revise my artist statement on their website to something more neutral, avoiding any mention of last night's incident. I told her my work had always been about challenging assumptions and power dynamics, that changing my statement now would be giving in to exactly what Robert represented. She sighed and said she'd have to run this by Weston, that they were trying to protect both my exhibition and the gallery's reputation. The Instagram comments kept coming and some of them turned nasty, people I'd never met telling me I deserved worse than a grabbed wrist, that women like me were ruining art for everyone. One message included my studio address, which I'd never posted publicly, saying they knew where to find me if I kept talking. My hands shook as I screenshot that one and several others that felt genuinely threatening. The security guard from the gallery called and asked if I could come by to file an official incident report since he'd witnessed Robert grab me. I met him at the gallery an hour later, and he took photos of my bruised wrist with his work phone, wrote down everything I told him about what Robert said and did. He showed me his initial notes from last night where he'd written that Robert had tried to have me removed for being drunk when I hadn't even finished one glass of champagne. The whole process took an hour and felt weirdly official, like this was becoming something legal instead of just an ugly incident at an art opening. While I was there, I asked Weston directly to ban Robert from the gallery for the rest of my exhibition's run. He shifted in his chair and said he'd need to review the security report first, that banning a major donor required board approval, but he'd consider it seriously. I could tell he was calculating the cost of losing Robert's donations against the bad publicity of keeping him around. That evening, Cadence sent me the video file through a secure link, and we sat in her apartment watching it together on her laptop. The audio was clear enough to hear Robert saying women lack the biological capacity for abstract thought, that I was probably there hunting for sugar daddies. We talked for 2 hours about whether making it public would help or just turn everything into a circus. She pointed out that going viral might bring attention to my art for all the wrong reasons, but staying quiet meant Robert would keep doing this to other women. We couldn't figure out the right answer, just kept going in circles about consent and consequences, and what would actually create change versus what would just create drama for drama's sake. My phone buzzed with a text from Adriana asking if she could stop by the gallery to discuss purchasing one of my pieces. I met her there the next afternoon, and she walked straight to my second largest painting, the one with the deep blues and copper streaks running through it. She stood there for a full minute just looking at it before turning to me and saying she wanted to place a hold on it, but wondered if I'd consider a discount given everything that happened at the opening. Her fingers traced the air in front of the painting, while she explained that while she loved the work, she worried about the drama affecting its value and whether other collectors might see it differently now. I felt my stomach tighten, because this was exactly what I'd been afraid of, that Robert's behavior would actually cost me sales and opportunities. She offered 20% less than the listed price, which meant losing almost $3,000 on a piece I'd spent 4 months creating. I told her I'd think about it and get back to her by the end of the week. That same evening, my friend who works as a lawyer called and asked if we could grab coffee because she'd seen my social media post and wanted to talk about the legal stuff. We met at the place near my apartment and she pulled out a legal pad, drawing diagrams while explaining defamation law and how even though what Robert did was wrong, I had to be really careful about what I said publicly. She explained that truth is a defense, but I'd need proof for everything, that saying he assaulted me was risky without witnesses willing to testify, and that his wealth meant he could drag out a lawsuit even if he couldn't win it. She suggested sticking to provable facts like what he said in front of witnesses, and avoiding anything that could be seen as opinion or interpretation. Her pen tapped the paper as she listed all the ways this could go wrong legally, how even being right doesn't mean you can afford to fight in court. I recorded our conversation on my phone so I could remember all the details later. The next morning I drove to urgent care because my wrist was still hurting, and I wanted official documentation of the injury. The waiting room was packed, and it took 3 hours before they called my name. The doctor examined my wrist, moving it in different directions while I explained what happened at the gallery. She said it was a minor sprain, nothing broken, but there was clear bruising and swelling consistent with someone grabbing me too hard. The exam cost me $85 after my insurance, money I really couldn't spare, but I needed that documentation. She printed out the report with photos of the bruising and told me to ice it and take ibuprofen for the pain. I stopped at the pharmacy on the way home and spent another $12 on supplies. Dorian called while I was icing my wrist and asked if we could meet to discuss his article idea. He came to my studio the next day with his recorder and notebook, looking at my paintings while outlining his plan to write about systemic sexism in galleries without naming Robert specifically. He said he could reference a recent incident and use it as a jumping-off point for a bigger conversation about how women artists are treated in these spaces. This felt like a compromise that would address the issue while protecting everyone legally, though part of me wanted him to name names and burn it all down. He interviewed me for an hour, asking about other times I'd experienced this kind of treatment, and I realized I had dozens of stories just like this one. 3 days later, I was working in my studio when my phone dinged with an email from a law firm. My hands literally shook as I opened it and read the formal warning from Robert's lawyer about potential legal action if I continued discussing the incident publicly. The letter used words like defamation and malicious intent and damages to reputation, and threatened both civil and criminal proceedings if I didn't stop immediately. I forwarded it to my lawyer friend within 30 seconds of reading it, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. She called me back within an hour and said the letter was mostly intimidation tactics, but we should take it seriously because he had the money to make my life hell even with a weak case. The gallery called the next morning, and Weston's assistant said they wanted to propose a mediated meeting between Robert and me to resolve things quietly. I agreed, but told them I needed witnesses present, and we'd have to agree beforehand about what we would and wouldn't discuss. They scheduled it for the following Tuesday at 2 o'clock in the gallery's conference room. I spent the weekend preparing, writing down everything I wanted to say, and practicing in front of my bathroom mirror. Tuesday came, and I walked into that conference room to find Robert already there with his lawyer, looking annoyed like this was wasting his time. The mediator was a woman in her 50s who kept talking about finding common ground and moving forward positively. Robert offered what he called an apology, but it was really just him saying he was sorry for any misunderstandings, and that he never meant to cause offense. He kept talking about his passion for art, and how sometimes that passion could be misinterpreted, never once acknowledging that he'd grabbed me, or said those horrible things about women. I stated clearly that he had physically hurt me and insulted me based on my gender, that this wasn't about misunderstanding, but about his behavior. His lawyer kept interrupting to rephrase what Robert was saying, trying to make it sound better without him actually taking responsibility for anything. After an hour of this circular conversation, the gallery's publicist suggested we take a photo together, shaking hands for their newsletter to show everything was resolved. I refused immediately, explaining that forced reconciliation photos would invalidate my experience and undermine everything my art stood for. Robert's face turned red and he muttered something about me being difficult, which his lawyer quickly talked over. The meeting ended with nothing really resolved except an agreement that Robert wouldn't attend any more events during my exhibition's run. 2 days later, Adriana texted asking if she could visit my studio to see more of my work. She arrived with coffee and spent 2 hours really looking at everything, asking questions about my process and themes. She told me that witnessing the incident at the opening actually helped her understand my work better, that she could see now how I was exploring power and assumptions in every piece. She ended up buying 2 smaller pieces at full price along with the larger one she'd originally wanted, saying she'd changed her mind about the discount after really understanding what the work meant. After she left, I sat down at my computer and typed up a formal complaint to the gallery with all my documentation attached. I included the medical report from urgent care, timestamps of everything that happened, screenshots of threatening messages I'd received, and a detailed timeline of events. I sent it to Weston directly with a request for a formal review and specific actions to prevent this from happening to other artists. His assistant acknowledged receipt within an hour and promised a thorough review within the week, though I wondered if anything would really change or if this was just paperwork to protect them legally. 3 days later, an email arrived from Weston with a draft of new event guidelines attached, asking for my input on the language. I opened the document and read through 6 pages of rules about appropriate behavior at gallery events. Most of it looked good, but the consequences section just said things like, may result in removal, without being specific. I typed up my feedback suggesting they add clear statements about banning people who grab artists or make discriminatory comments. The next morning, Dorian sent me a link to his article on the local arts website with a note saying it was already getting shared everywhere. The piece talked about patterns he'd noticed at galleries over the years without naming Robert or me directly. He wrote about wealthy collectors treating artists like servants and how galleries often protected donors over creators. Within 2 hours, the article had over 3,000 shares, and the comments section exploded with stories from other artists. Some painters shared times they'd been talked down to at their own openings. Photographers described collectors explaining their own work to them. Sculptors wrote about being mistaken for assistants at their exhibitions. But mixed in with the support were angry comments from collectors saying artists should be grateful for any attention. Some people wrote long posts about how this was just cancel culture destroying the art world. A few collectors threatened to stop buying from galleries that sided with sensitive artists. I closed my laptop after reading one particularly nasty comment about female artists playing victim for attention. My phone buzzed with Instagram notifications every few minutes, but I turned them off to protect my peace. That evening, a message came through from someone named Sarah who said she was 22 and just starting to show her work. She wrote that the article made her feel less crazy about her own experiences at galleries. She'd been grabbed by an older man at her first group show who told her she was too pretty to waste time painting. Reading her message reminded me this was bigger than just my situation with Robert. The next afternoon, I got a text from the security guard at the gallery with a photo attached. The image showed Robert arguing with staff at the entrance to a new exhibition opening. The guard wrote that they'd turned him away based on the pending review of my complaint. I felt my shoulders relax, knowing the gallery was actually doing something even if it was temporary. Later that week, Adriana called to discuss her purchase decision after visiting my studio. She'd decided to buy one of my medium pieces instead of the large one she originally wanted. The price was $12,000 instead of $25,000, but she said it fit her collection better. I wondered if she would have bought the bigger piece at full price if the whole Robert thing hadn't happened. After hanging up, I sat at my kitchen table with my calculator and notebook to figure out my finances. The gallery would take 40% of the $12,000, leaving me with $7,200. My urgent care visit cost $350 after insurance. Rent was due in 5 days at $1,800. After supplies and other bills, I'd have enough to get by, but not much extra. The math was tighter than I'd hoped for my first big sale, but at least I could pay everything. Monday morning brought another email from Weston with the final version of the gallery's new code of conduct. They'd added most of my suggestions, including specific language about physical contact and harassment. The document now stated that anyone who grabbed an artist or made discriminatory comments would be immediately removed and banned. I drove to the gallery that afternoon to see them installing a large sign by the entrance with the new rules. The sign listed prohibited behaviors in clear language and included a QR code for reporting problems. Seeing it posted publicly felt like a real victory, even though it shouldn't have taken this long. 2 days later, a certified letter arrived from Robert's lawyer with one final statement. The letter said their client would have no further contact with me if I agreed to stop discussing the incident publicly. I read it twice, then put it in my filing cabinet without responding since silence seemed like the best answer. That weekend, I got an email from a community art center downtown asking if I'd be interested in giving a talk. They wanted me to speak to young artists about navigating gallery openings and dealing with difficult collectors. I wrote back immediately saying yes, and we scheduled it for the following month. Preparing for the talk gave me something positive to focus on instead of dwelling on the drama. I started making notes about practical tips like bringing a friend to openings and documenting any problems. The community center posted about my upcoming talk on their social media, and within a day, 50 people had signed up. Several messages came from art students saying they were excited to hear my advice about the gallery world. One girl wrote that she'd been too scared to show her work after hearing horror stories, but my story made her want to try. I added more practical content to my talk about setting boundaries and knowing your rights as an artist. The week before my talk, I practiced in front of my bathroom mirror, timing myself to make sure I covered everything in an hour. The day after my talk, I walked into my studio and stood in front of a fresh canvas for the first time since the opening. My hands moved without planning, mixing colors that felt different from my usual palette, bolder and taking up more space on the canvas. The brush strokes came out wider and more confident as I worked through what had happened over the past weeks. I painted for 6 hours straight without checking my phone once, just letting the work flow out of me. When I finally stepped back, the piece looked nothing like my previous work, but somehow felt more like me than anything I'd made before. That evening, I opened my laptop and clicked through my social media settings to add keyword filters for certain words I didn't want to see anymore. Cadence came over with takeout and helped me set up moderation rules, so comments would need approval before showing up publicly. She showed me how to block entire domains and turn off message requests from people I didn't follow. We spent 3 hours getting everything locked down tight so I could control who had access to my online space. The next morning, I drove to the gallery to drop off some business cards and saw the security guard who'd helped me that first night. I walked over and thanked him for filing that report and taking photos of my wrist when Robert had grabbed me. He told me the gallery had brought in a trainer last week to teach all the staff how to handle situations like mine. The training covered recognizing problem behavior early and stepping in before things got physical with artists or other guests. He said he was proud of how I'd handled everything and that my speaking up had made the gallery safer for everyone. His words stuck with me as I drove home, making me feel like maybe something good had come from all this mess. 2 days later, Cadence and I met for coffee at our usual spot near the community center. She pulled up the video on her phone of me handing Robert my champagne glass, and we actually laughed at his face in that moment. We talked about how perfect the timing was with the curator calling me up right then to speak. Cadence said the look of horror on his face when he realized who I was would never get old. Finding the humor in that one moment helped me feel less like a victim and more like someone who'd handled a bad situation well. The exhibition's final weekend arrived, and I spent both days at the gallery watching people look at my work. 3 pieces sold on Saturday, including one to a collector who'd driven 4 hours just to see the show. Sunday brought 2 serious inquiries from collectors who wanted to visit my studio to see more work. My paintings were finally speaking for themselves without the drama of opening night hanging over them. People asked about my process and inspiration without mentioning what had happened with Robert at all. That Monday, I sat down to write a post thanking everyone who'd supported me through the past few weeks. I linked to the gallery's new code of conduct and mentioned how proud I was to show there with these new policies in place. Within an hour, the post had hundreds of likes and comments from artists sharing their own experiences. 3 other galleries messaged asking for copies of the policy language to adapt for their own spaces. Seeing other venues take this seriously because of what I'd shared made all the stress feel worth it. Wednesday afternoon, Weston called to tell me the board had made their final decision about Robert. He was banned from all gallery events for 6 months with a review after that period to decide if he could return. Weston said Robert would need to complete sensitivity training and write a formal apology before they'd even consider letting him back. It wasn't the permanent ban I'd hoped for, but hearing that a major donor faced real consequences felt like more than I'd expected. The next week, I was back in my studio working on a new series when I noticed my hospital wristband still sitting on my desk. I picked it up and pinned it to the corkboard above my sketches, next to photos of my finished pieces. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that speaking up had mattered even when it was scary and hard. I squeezed fresh paint onto my palette and picked up my biggest brush to start a new canvas. The work felt different now, like I had permission to take up all the space I needed without apologizing for it. My phone buzzed with a text from Cadence saying another gallery wanted to talk to me about a group show next year. I smiled and turned the phone face down to keep painting, because right now this moment of creating was exactly where I wanted to be. Thanks for letting me wander alongside you through all of this today. It's definitely been interesting sharing these moments together. Take care. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.